Welcome to the Made in Bloomsbury podcast. I'm here with Amos. Hi, Amos.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Amos, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your bio, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the CEO and one of the two founders of Unwritten, which is a climate risk platform for private equity and real economy companies. Um, my background, I guess, was a little kind of undulating in reaching this point. So directly before founding the company, I spent 4 years at Palantir Technologies, the AI and data company, here in the UK and also in the US. And that culminated in helping to set up a climate data team there with my now co-founder, Dr. Philip Marks. But before that, I was in an entirely different industry. I was a journalist for the first part of my career, writing about financial regulation and financial crime.
Nice. Sounds very cool. What's the sort of inspiration behind doing what you're doing?
I think that the point at which Philip and I were thinking about moving on from what we were doing at Palantir to setting up Unwritten, we were, one, I should say, inspired by the climate tech scene as it was growing in London in general. We thought, that there must be some ways that we can take the experience we've gained from this organization and the skills we have as developers of software primarily and use that to work on this issue that we care about. And it was great to have a community of other climate tech founders doing similar things around us in the city. Um, but very specifically, we had been involved already in applications of data science to think about translating uncertain long-term risks, the physical risks that climate change exacerbates, translating those into financial impacts and potential actions in the context of insurance and asset management. So we had quite a lot of exposure to the climate risk world, and we saw some real gaps in a kind of underlying modeling capabilities and the data available to financial decision makers to think about what are generally termed transition risks as well as physical risks. So not just the risks of floods and wildfires and storm surges and cyclones and these very obvious impacts of uncontrolled climate change, but also the economic impacts associated with transitioning to a lower carbon economy and indeed with not transitioning. So the very obvious examples are things like carbon taxes, but it could be much more nuanced as well. It can be the ways in which consumer sentiment changes and starts to present reputational risks, or there are increased legal risks to companies of certain kind. So we felt that there was just insufficient modeling and data out there to describe those sorts of risks in dollars and cents in financial terms to decision makers. And so that was where we started with the business.
Nice. And diving into that business a little bit further, what problems are you solving for your clients?
Generally, our clients have to think about climate risk for a couple of reasons. One would be regulatory. They are mandated by things like the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, to talk publicly about the impacts that climate change might have on their business or their fund. And then, having done so, there are the actions that they take that follow from those disclosures and from the internal policies that they have. And that might be, for example, to think about the implications of those climate-related risks in their due diligence process for new deals and in the way that they work with companies in their portfolio, or if it's a real economy company, the ways in which their risk strategy, their governance, and so on reflects growing climate-related risks. So the problems that we are generally solving for clients are, well, climate risk is a huge sphere. It's a kind of a huge set of issues which are not necessarily directly overlapping or correlated with one another. Your increased chance of coastal flooding has not necessarily anything obviously to do with the increased reputational or legal risk as a result of the transition, changing consumer sentiment. So we're generally trying to apply software at problems that software is good at solving. And that means taking these very big questions and narrowing them down to much more specific hotspots for further investigation. So if the starting point is, I'm going to tell your software platform about a company, what are all of the ways that climate might present a material risk to that company? Huge range of things. How do we boil that down to where is it actually worth detailed investigation, detailed follow-up, the development of mitigation strategies to specific risks? Because it's very rarely the case that every company encompasses all risks. So to save time and to be efficient, it's very important to think about just those specific sub-risks that actually matter in each case, and then to invest due time and resource in following them up.
Yeah, yeah. So why is climate risk an important problem to solve?
I think that sometimes we have been more willing to talk about mitigation than adaptation, which is to say, to talk more about what do we do to slow down climate change, to prevent climate catastrophe, than to talk about how we deal with the impacts of the climate change that may occur or is indeed already baked in the emissions that we've already released into the atmosphere. And I think that that's a big mistake for a number of reasons. First, it's important to remember that we're always talking about the human cost when we're talking about mitigation or adaptation, climate change, other aspects of nature. We're talking about the ways in which we are fundamentally reliant on the planetary systems around us. And so, whilst it is critically important to mitigate, to slow the rate of emissions, to avoid the worst possible climate outcomes, from that framing of, we're thinking about the human problems here, we've got to acknowledge that we're not on a great pathway at the moment. We've already baked in significant climate impacts. And moreover, that the actions that we take to mitigate more climate change will themselves have economic consequences. And so I think it's deeply important that we start to flag those risks and encourage decision makers of all kinds, financial and in large corporations and so on, to reflect and bake those risks into their strategies.
Interesting. So you started the company with a colleague from Palantir. How did your experience there shape Unwritten?
The the kind of core offering of our company, the core offering of Unwritten, is data. We are how to build very quickly and maintain the stability of large data infrastructure, large data pipelines, and so on. But actually, I would say more fundamentally, what we've taken away when we're talking to customers and in our marketing and internally, which is decision useful, is the information that I'm surfacing about climate risks actually actionable? Can you look at it and say, I should do something about that. I should build a retaining wall, or even that's something that seems real and I should investigate it further. And I think that we've found with our clients that there have been many years of frustration of trying to deal with ESG data that is not decision useful, that does not link to actions that are within our client's power to take to actually understand the materiality of risks and do something about them. So we've tried to break some of the conventions that have prevailed in the space. So for example, we try not to talk too much just about carbon emissions, carbon taxes, and instead present a much more realistic view of all of the policies, both tax, kind of negative incentive type policies, tax type policies, and positive incentive subsidy type policies. For example, so we present this much broader view of the policy landscape because that is something that is tangible that people can go away and build into their strategy.
Wow. Sounds very interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.